at Dartmouth College, and she focuses on Buddhism and gender. Her current project examines the biographical writings of Buddhist women in Myanmar, and she is looking at how they present themselves and discuss Buddhist authority, time, and belonging. And all of that is informed by her field work in a nunnery and all of its branches. And her research has been supported by several different areas or several different places, including the Social Science Research Council, the Fulbright Hayes Program, and the Robert H.N. Hoe Family Foundation. Today, she's going to be speaking on Buddhism, politics, and belonging and in Myanmar. And I would ask you all if we can hold questions until the end. We do have live streamers. They can't talk, but we do have live streamers in, so if we can hold questions till the end, it would allow us to go around with the microphone so that they can at least hear the questions and then hear the discussion. So without further ado, please help me welcome Dr. Long.
Thank you all so much for coming this morning, and to Christine for organizing this. And it's been a really warm and friendly welcome since we arrived on campus this morning, so thank you all. I wanted to begin my talk this morning in relation to what some of you may have heard about in the news. Very recently, less than a week ago, on Friday last week, a 7.7 magnitude earthquake hit Myanmar. This is a photo from one of the nunneries where I have done a bit of field work. As you can see, there has been a lot of incredible destruction. This area where this nunnery is located is the epicenter of the earthquake. So you can see, oh, sure, yeah, it's on. Okay. So a few more photos from the nunnery as they have started to clean up. But although this area is at the epicenter of the earthquake, it's been very difficult for communities there to get help. Partly that is because Myanmar, in February 2021, there was a military coup, one in a line of several coups across the later 20th century. And the current junta has been not very helpful for local communities trying to recover from the earthquake, recover bodies out of the destruction. The junta has been basically directing relief support from international aid organizations to those who are supportive of them and not to much of the rest of the country. The military junta has also continued. There's an ongoing civil war in Myanmar right now. The military junta has continued airstrikes throughout the earthquake. So it's really a dire situation in Myanmar right now. Nobody deserves a natural disaster, but I think the people of Myanmar especially do not. So without support from the military administration, oh, this is to locate us, sorry. And some more maps to show the extent and the epicenter of the quake. So you can see the area where that nunnery is along is the city of Sagaing. The fault where the earthquake hit was directly, it's called the Sagaing Fault. So that's how they're in the center. That city specifically is the greatest concentration of Buddhist monastics in the world. So there are many nunneries and monasteries in this area that are recovering. Of course, monastics are not the only ones who are facing this destruction. Local communities in Mandalay, which is one of Myanmar's biggest cities, are also dealing with this recovery. in the midst of an ongoing civil war. So without the support of the military administration, there's been a huge volunteer movement, people coming very mobile throughout the country, if they have the resources to leave home and support the communities that were the worst hit they are. You can see this volunteer crew bringing supplies. Many people are making donations to these monastics to support them through this time while they're cut off from their typical sources of support. And we're going to talk in a little bit, we'll talk a little more about the significance of acts of generosity like this in a Buddhist context. And I also want to recognize that it's not just Buddhists who are affected who are affected by this disaster. Also in Sagaing, at the epicenter, there are many mosques, and throughout Mandalay, throughout Myanmar in general, there is a strong Muslim community. And although Muslims are a religious minority in Myanmar, their mosques had some of the most sort of catastrophic destruction because Muslims are systematically denied the ability to apply for building permits by the Myanmar government. So mosques can't be repaired. They've not been able to renovate buildings for their community. This doesn't just apply to religious buildings, but also family homes cannot be repaired or renovated. So there's been, to make matters even worse, the earthquake hit on a Friday, which was the typical day for prayer. And we're coming to, or last week was the end of Ramadan. So many, many people were at the mosque when the earthquake hit. So Myanmar's Muslim community, already oppressed by a violent military state, is now facing truly undue suffering because of the earthquake on top of that. So what I'm going to talk about today really sort of tries to take into account how we get to a place where, many of us hear about Buddhism in popular culture as a religion of peace. We associate Buddhism with things like meditation, contemplation. So how do we get from, or how do we then encounter a Buddhist majority country that's led by one of the most repressive, discriminatory military regimes in our current era? As I go, I'm going to flag some resources, since part of our project here on campus is to think about resources for pedagogy. I'm just flagging that there's some really great research done on religion and property rights in Myanmar. So occasionally I'll sort of point to some of these resources throughout the talk. But in general, what I want to think about today is Buddhist and Muslim relationships in Myanmar, why and how anti-Muslim discourse has been on the rise, especially since the 2010s. Some sort of longer histories related to the rise of Buddhist nationalism and what that means for ordinary people in their everyday sense of belonging in the country of Myanmar. So just to say, Myanmar is an incredibly diverse country. Officially, the government recognizes 135 different ethnic groups. There are probably more than those officially recognized. And many of these communities have their own languages and many of them are, although Myanmar is a Buddhist majority country, 90% Buddhist, there are religious minorities, Christians, Muslims, and those who practice indigenous religions as well. However, even though Muslims make up only about 4% of the population, there has been a growing wave of Islamophobia in Myanmar, specifically fears that the Muslim population will displace the Buddhist population. So this is clearly in contrast with social reality. and is in contrast with very long histories of coexistence in Myanmar and in Southeast Asia more broadly. So how do we understand where this anti-Muslim discourse came from, and why, especially, is it being propagated by Buddhist monks, who we would expect to be symbols of peace, scholastic erudition? What is their role in this problem? So there's two sort of general ways we can think about the history of Buddhist nationalism and anti-Muslim discourse. And when I say Buddhist nationalism, I mean the sense that this is one of the slogans from the anti-colonial movement in Myanmar, that to be Burmese, to belong to the Myanmar nation, is to be Buddhist. So this is one of the ways, since Myanmar, or as it was known formerly Burma, was a colony of the British Empire, the anti-colonial movement there really gained ground at the turn of the 20th century by drawing on Buddhist rhetoric. That people needed to articulate one's sense of nationhood, independent from the British Empire. Many leaders said we need to protect our Buddhist homeland. Now, because as a colony, Burma was governed as a province of British India. And so during that period, the British Empire brought or enabled the migration of many South Asians into Burma. And so at this time, in the way that Burmese subjects articulated their national identity, they said, we are Burmese and we are Buddhist. And so at that time, there was a wave of anti-foreigner sentiment. And a lot of this became directed at South Asians and in particular Muslims. So one way of thinking about this history of Buddhist nationalist discourse, and particularly its anti-Muslim bent, is that it all got its start in the colonial period. So one of the problems with this argument is that it doesn't really account for the fact that there were Muslims in Myanmar long before the colonial period. So that's one reason that we should question this sense of this long history of anti-Muslim sentiment. And another reason is that this argument would also lead us to believe that the current wave of anti-Muslim sentiment was somehow inevitable. That because it was like this at the beginning of the 20th century, we should just expect it to be like this. It's a long and enduring discourse that people have inherited. And I don't think that's true. I think there's a much more powerful argument to be found in a much more recent history that has a lot to do with the military state stoking Islamophobia for their own benefit. So as we saw in the example of the issue of property rights, issues around property rights are just one way that the military state has sought to undermine belonging of Muslims in Myanmar. There is, in 1982, a citizenship law that made it much more difficult for non-Buddhists and the ethnic minorities to claim citizenship and to protect their identity as citizens. And also, since the 2010s, the military state, in many different forms, has supported particular groups of Buddhist monks who are propagating anti-Muslim sentiment. This group is called by its acronym Mabatha, and it's a community that claims to be organized for the protection of race and religion in Myanmar. And by race and religion, they mean Buddhist and Bama, the main majority ethnic group in the country. So By supporting those monks and through a series of other political moves and social policies, the military junta continues to authorize its land grabs and clearance operations. For example, some of you may have heard about the Rohingya genocide in Western Myanmar, all in the name of protecting and defending Buddhism. Now, for many of us, the idea that the military would see itself in the role of protecting and defending Buddhism, that's kind of a mismatch. We think we don't, well, in some cases, it's very common to think of religion and politics as separate domains. However, thinking in those terms is sort of counterproductive in trying to understand these dynamics. So here's this guy. This is one of these hardline Buddhist nationalist monks. This is from 2013 on the cover of Time magazine, The Face of Buddhist Terror. Now, at that time, 2013, Myanmar was in what some have called its period of democratic transition. And this monk at that time, while he was getting a lot of media coverage and finding support among some Buddhists in Myanmar, he was also censured by the government and told, not forcibly told to leave the monastic community, but asked to lay low. Now, just in 2023, this same monk was honored at a national ceremony where he was given a special title and prize. The fellow in his ceremonial garb giving this gift to this particular monk is General Min Aung Hlaing, the head of the junta. So in just a decade, we see a reversal from this period of democratic transition, and this particular monk being censured, to the current junta now supporting him and showing their alliance with this monk and his nationalist organization, Mabata. So how does that happen? And what is going on here with the head of the military giving this special gift and title to this Buddhist monk? I want to try to unpack what the sort of symbolic significance of this relationship is in a Buddhist context. The key concept that is helpful to have in mind here is the local concept of the sasana, or in its Burmese pronunciation, tatana. This word comes from the Pali language, which is the scriptural language of Buddhism in South and Southeast Asia. This is a concept, working with a local concept like this is really helpful for kind of shaking us up out of some of our typical assumptions. For example, when we think of the category of religion, we more often want to understand it as somehow separate from the domain of politics and the economy. But if we think with this idea of the sasana, we have to understand the way it works based on a totally overlapping sense of religion and politics. So in general, this term, sasana, is the term we use to refer to the teachings of the Buddha. It often gets translated as the Buddhist religion. But it also includes the institutions that are set up to maintain and propagate those teachings, so monasteries, nunneries, other kinds of Buddhist institutions, study centers. It also refers to the possibility, in general, of pursuing the Buddhist path, finding enlightenment, overcoming the suffering of our day-to-day existence. So this one term encompasses all these different things, from the most material, the institutions, the places, the books, the teachings, to the much more abstract, the possibility of salvation. So one truth that we learn from the Buddhist tradition is that everything is impermanent. All things are subject to change. And this is true for the sasana itself. For Buddhism itself is not eternal. It changes, and it will one day fall apart and disappear. And so the sasana requires support, ongoing maintenance. And the best person to do this maintenance is a righteous ruler, a Dhammaraja. So this is one of the ways that we get into this idea that we need a political support system for a religious complex. So we're also going to get a little brief intro to Buddhist cosmology here to understand this relationship between ordinary Buddhists, someone like a Buddhist king or a Buddhist ruler, and understand what is this possibility of salvation. So for Buddhists, this is one way to think about the shape of the universe, or cosmology. This particular image is a Tibetan representation of the Buddhist universe. Some of you may know that Buddhists understand their lives to be structured by rebirth. So you don't just live a single lifetime. At the end of your life, you're reborn into the next lifetime. You could be reborn into any one of 6 realms. These go from a heavenly realm, where you're a god or a goddess, sort of blissed out on vacation, no worries, to hell. And Buddhists are very good at imagining hell. So here is just one example, a 19th century Burmese manuscript showing a depiction of a Buddhist hell realm where people are being cooked in soup, torn at by animals, poked with spikes, hung upside down, all manner of suffering. Now, you don't just suffer in hell. All existence is characterized by suffering from a Buddhist perspective. So this cycle of death and rebirth is called samsara. The ultimate aim is nibbana, or nirvana might be the term that is a little more familiar. Several classical Buddhist languages in play here. But in general, the aim of being a Buddhist is to try to ensure that you have a comfortable rebirth in your next life, and that your family members and friends are comfortable in their next rebirths. That's what most ordinary Buddhists are sort of looking to ensure on their day-to-day life. And there's lots of different ways that they do that. So what moves you through these different realms of existence is karma, or kamma. Karma is a word that has become really common. You do something bad happens, you say, oh, it's just my karma. It doesn't quite work like that. Karma is not easy to trace. So in general, we just think of karma as a system of cause and effect. One thing happens, one action is performed, it will have an effect. We just don't know when that effect will actually occur. Some of these choices will mature and ripen over time. One of the metaphors that Buddhists use to think about karma is a fruit, the fruits of your karma. You don't always know when they will ripen. So it could have a consequence in this lifetime. It might have a consequence in a far future lifetime. The negative circumstances that you experience in this life could be the fruit of something that happened to you or something you did many lifetimes previous. We can't know. But what we can do is try to do the right kind of actions that will yield the good fruit. And the good fruit is called punya, or in Burmese, bon. So this is the good things that happen to you, the merit that you get from your good works. And basically anything that you do to support the sasana, this term for Buddhism that we just learned, will earn you good merit. It's not just for you. You can also ritually transfer your good merit to the people you love, especially your deceased family and friends who might be in hell. We don't know. But if they are, we want to help them get out. So we do good acts. Now, in Burmese, this word bon we see it all the time. The way that you refer to a monk is the word bonji, big bon, big merit. So monks, Buddhist monks, are considered to have the most merit. Just by nature that they are able to live a life as a monk, They are thought of as the people in society with the most merit. And this is one source of their authority. So socially, this system of merit making is one of the things that sort of orders Buddhist social interaction. So Buddhists need merit to avoid hell and to help their loved ones get out of hell, as we see. Okay, how do we get it? We do things that support the sasana. For example, offering food, money, medicine to monks, monasteries, also to nuns, sponsoring events like preaching festivals where the Buddhist teachings are shared, financing the renovation of Buddhist sites, monasteries, pagodas, paying for the production of texts. Sons and sometimes daughters will ordain as temporary monastics. This is also an act that generates a lot of merit because it demonstrates one's commitment to the monastic community. Now, can we think, and I'm gonna, in the next couple of slides, ask for a little bit of audience participation. Can you think of what else people might get by doing these actions? What other effects might that have on their day-to-day life? Not necessarily a Buddhist thing at all. Sorry? So let's say you've got a family who sponsors a big preaching festival. It's going to spread religion, and what else might their neighbors think? Yes, it invites connections, power, social prestige. Great. Okay, so here, in a lot of these acts are very public for all to see. So doing acts of merit making also generates social prestige. This is what, and so monks, because they are the ones who already have the most merit, and they are the ones with the specialized training to facilitate these events, or who are invited to perform at the preaching festivals, or who will be producing the texts that you are financing, they become what we call fields of merit. So the monks have to be there for the merit to be earned. And this adds to the prestige of monks in general in Burmese society. So they have this high status, they are in demand, they have a symbolic authority. And this is, this image is of a daily alms round where monks will go out in a neighborhood and will receive food and money from their neighbors. So that's what you see in this image. Now, people don't just blindly support monks just because of this social prestige. There's also ongoing critique of this role in society. So I have another need for some audience participation. This is a Burmese riddle. Let's see if we can answer each aspect of the riddle. So one is ill-treated by the other and yet does not hate them. Who can it be? Any ideas? Don't think like you need to know anything about Buddhism to answer this riddle. Sorry? A monk. Nope, it's not a monk. Sorry?
Me is my response.
You, but you as what? A person, okay. A specific kind of, where each answer is a specific kind of person.
Dog?
Okay.
Is it the monk?
Nope, it's not a mug. Yeah. Uh-huh. Sorry, what were you going to say?
I was going to say a mother.
A mother, yes. The answer to the first one is a mother and her newborn. The newborn ill-treats a mother, and she never hates them, most of the time. Okay. One gives orders to the other, but the other does not obey. Who can it be?
Kids.
Yes. So this one,
I've got two.
yeah. So this one's a little easier. Okay. Fathers and sons in the Burmese context, yeah. Okay, one is teased by the other, but does not become hostile.
Lovers.
Lovers. Yes, lovers. Okay, now we come to the takeaway. One always gives to the other, but the other squanders what is given and still asks for more. Monks. So lay people, lay Buddhist supporters, and the monks. Okay? So even though monks are in this sort of structural role of dependence on ordinary people, and lay Buddhists are getting merit from the monks by giving, they also say, man, those guys just keep asking for more. Okay, so it's not like this is just a blind acceptance of monastic authority. There is an ongoing critique. Okay, and this critique isn't just of monks. So this image again, our military junta general Min Aung Hlaing making his offering to this particular monk, the hardline nationalist anti-Muslim monk. So monks serve in this field of merit role also for the state because of this classical model of the good Buddhist king, the Dhammaraja. The duty of that leader is to support the sasana, and they do that in a few different ways. They patronize the monastic community, the sangha, so they're giving financial support to monasteries, pagodas, training centers, also to individual monks who they bestow their authority unto. And by patronizing those institutions, the state also gets a degree of control over them. So at certain times, when the state chooses to make offerings to monasteries, they will also put monks who are friendly to the military state in charge. And by becoming the main significant patrons of those institutions, they get that sort of right to dictate who's in charge. Now, on the other hand, the state can also defrock monks, exclude them from the monastic community. This is called purification. So they can decide which monks are good, which ones are bad. So in that earlier administration in 2013, this particular monk was censured. He wasn't kicked out, but he was censured. Now, 10 years later, he's come with support. So we see these shifting authorities taking different orientations to what is a good monk. But this, too, isn't the end of the story. Buddhists, ordinary lay Buddhists, also don't just accept whoever happens to be capable of this form of leadership and sponsorship of the sasana. They don't just accept them necessarily as a legitimate leader. And we're seeing that now, especially since the coup in 2021. So in Myanmar, which has been a place with really polarized identities, religious identities, ethnic identities, after the coup, people were really sick of it. And there has been this incredible revival of post-coup solidarity between ethnic groups, religious groups. So you can see a Catholic nun here on her knees in front of military personnel, saying to them, there are recordings of her speaking, saying, shoot me instead. Don't shoot these protesters. We have the drag queens coming out to march in protests against the military. We have the Gurkha community, another ethnic minority rooted in Nepal, but with a strong presence in Myanmar as well, marching with protesters against the coup. So right after the coup, there was this sort of resurgence of recognition of one another across lines of religious and ethnic difference, that so many are now oppressed by the military. The military is really only willing to support those who are loyal to it. And so there's been this incredible kind of new or shifting lines of solidarity across these communities of identity. Now, the earthquake has definitely done some damage there. And the military is not doing its job as a righteous ruler in the sense of taking care of its people. And the people know it. So this is just today. a silent protest in Yangon, Myanmar's largest city, saying, okay, I think saying to the world, yeah, this earthquake happened, yes, it's truly disastrous, but the real disaster still continues and hasn't changed yet. The military has not called a full ceasefire during the earthquake recovery. They're continuing to bomb ethnic minority groups throughout the country, and that's the real disaster. Thank you. That's the end of the talk. I hope we still have some time for discussion, too. And I will say, I'm happy to share at the end of this presentation, I have included a lot of other resources on some of these different topics from the Berkeley Center for World Affairs. This is a film about, this is the filmmaker here, Jaylin Six. She does a sort of memoir short film about visiting her aunt, who is a Muslim woman caught in the crossfire of an anti-Muslim riot in the city of Metila, but who was rescued by her best childhood friend, a Buddhist woman. So it's about a Buddhist-Muslim friendship. For those of you interested in the Rohingya genocide, this is a memoir written by a Rohingya man who discusses his childhood growing up as a Rohingya, trying to conceal his identity, but was able eventually to make his way out of the country. He's now achieved refugee status in Australia, and a couple other resources about this situation specifically for the Rohingya in Rakhine State. I think that's it. So thank you all. I'm happy to share these resources whenever. Oh, sure.
Yeah, they want.
What's here? Okay.
Mike, if you want. Does anyone have any questions?
Thank you. One of the things that I was thinking about while I was watching this is that I teach a course on religion and political violence. It's technically religious terrorism, but terrorism means a lot of things. So I'm currently using, when we get to Buddhism, what I'm currently using is Peter Lehr's book on Buddhist violence in Myanmar and Thailand and Sri Lanka. And I guess my question is, maybe this is opening a can of worms, but what is the academic reception of Peter Lehr's book among the people who are specialists on Buddhism, Theravada Buddhism in particular?
Should
I be using this book, or should I be supplementing it with something?
Well, I mean, like as with all of our teaching materials, it depends what you're going to do with it. So I think Peter's book is not one that I don't know that book super well. So I can't necessarily speak specifically about that. I would say in general, sometimes the kind of regional treatment can kind of gloss over really important local details. Like even within Myanmar, we can't think about Buddhist-Muslim relationships in one way because the Rohingya situation is very different from Buddhist-Muslim relations in other parts of the country. So it sort of depends what scale of perspective you're getting from that book.
Yeah, the thesis I think that I would take from at least the parts of the book we use is that the rationale for violence even against civilians in Buddhism, in Theravada Buddhism, is the protection of the Sangha. The need to preserve, I think it would probably be better expressed as sasana in your talk, but the need to preserve the possibility of nibbana for future generations and future people. And so everything's framed as defensive. If Muslims are seen as deracinating Buddhists or displacing Buddhists, then, well, to defend nibbana and defend the mere possibility of enlightenment, it may be necessary to use violence against them to prevent that threat.
Yes.
I think the key phrase in the book is, Buddhism is not a suicidal utopianism.
No, it is not.
One of the things that he was told by by, you know, the people interviewed.
Okay. Yes, I do think that discourse of the defense of the sasana is generalizable across cases in terms of the kind of rhetoric used to authorize Buddhist violence. That as long as it is done for the good of the sasana, it's okay. Yeah, but on the ground, lots of people would contest that discourse also.
And one very specific question.
Sure.
Regarding the citizenship law, when the civilians came to power after the State Law and Order Restoration Council or whatever, when the civilians finally came to power, why didn't they repeal the citizenship law?
There's been a lot of attempts to rewrite the Constitution, to repeal certain citizenship laws, to change certain citizenship laws. A lot of those have just been no-goes. It's an incredibly dysfunctional parliament in which the military, even during the transition, still maintained the majority of seats. So even in that transition period, it was more a sort of nominal civilian takeover.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, thanks.
Considering the political landscape here, how does research work? I mean, in terms of access, in terms of just doing the things that you need to do?
Currently, it doesn't. Yeah, so there's no, I mean, obviously with the earthquake, there's no visas to be had to go to Myanmar. They had just sort of reopened tourist visas. But basically since the pandemic, fieldwork in Myanmar has been a no-go, which unfortunately those of us in Burma-Myanmar studies have to sort of be used to. So there's some, a lot of research gaps where there was a ton of fieldwork done in Burma in the 60s. A lot of it funded by the CIA. So Burma was like a very well-known entity, and then with the Ne Win's government that took over in the 60s, they started this really strong isolationist policies that made it very difficult for foreigners to do anything in the country without being tracked. So that was very common in terms of like fieldwork access for most of the 20th century. Like my generation of scholars, we got to enjoy this sort of brief window where we could go anywhere and do anything. As long as you weren't really stirring up too much trouble, nobody really cared. And that has now changed again. Especially since the coup, the 2021 coup, now it's quite difficult. I mean, I chose not to return even when there were tourist visas to be had because I don't want to draw attention to my friends. We're also able to stay in touch fairly well through social media and texting. So a lot of people have turned to social media fieldwork, or digital fieldwork, I guess we call that. But now that is also pretty fraught as that has become more and more trackable. So yeah, it's a difficult situation for sure.
Thanks.
Questions from anyone? Yeah.
These airstrikes that are occurring, are they against strictly civilian groups or militant groups that are incorporating themselves into civilian groups?
Yeah. So right now, the civil war that started since the 2021 coup, these forces call themselves People's Defense Forces, PDFs. So they are, some of them are newly emergent armed groups of civilians. Others have been part of different ethnic armies that were started during the independence movement. There was a strong push for Myanmar or Burma at the time to be a federal system, but the leaders of the independence movement ended up rejecting that idea. So that's when the Civil War in the earlier part of the 20th century began. So there is a variety of ethnic armies that were formed at that time. Actually, well, they weren't formed. Some of them also fought in the colonial resistance, and some fought with the British also. So this history of armed ethnic groups is long and fraught. The PDFs now tend to have a lot of civilian support because they are just ordinary people who have said, we're done with this. They're also having a hard time right now because the military started a conscription drive. So many young people have left and crossed the border into Thailand to avoid being drafted. So the PDFs are having a harder time getting support because it's mostly older folks left to do what they can to feed and house them. Yeah.
Do we have any other questions? Yes.
MK, thank you. Wonderful presentation. I'm just curious about the Rohingya Muslims. What led to their displacement? I know there was some civilian unrest. What led to their displacement?
Yeah, so this is one of these cases during the time of independence, Arakan or Rakhine, the western state of Myanmar. I actually don't think I have a map that shows the states. But so Arakan state is on the border with India and Bangladesh, which is where most of the Rohingya community is rooted. So Arakan never saw itself as part of the Burmese nation. It was a separate kingdom prior to the British Empire that was then annexed into British India, and then later the rest of the country in several phases was also annexed into British India. So when at independence, Arakan was forced into the nation of Myanmar, or Burma, from that point, it was very clear that those in charge of that state did not want to be part of the nation. They wanted to be independent. So this is the Arakan army, which the Myanmar state classifies as a terrorist organization. They are seeking sovereignty from the nation. But there are also Rakhine Buddhists, not just Rohingya Muslims. So there is a Rakhine Muslim army, there is a Rakhine Buddhist army. They're having their own sort of internal civil war and also fighting the military. So the Arakan army actually, the Buddhist, predominantly Buddhist Arakan army actually controls most of the border with Bangladesh and India. So the current military junta does not have control over that border, and that really irks them. And so clearing the Rohingya community is part of their attempt to get that land back under their power. Yeah.
Thank you.
Other questions? You want another one? Okay.
Ma'am, who exactly is taking in the refugees that are fleeing this conflict? Like, per se, the countries nearby, are they receptive to taking in these refugees, or are they pushing them back? And are the refugees sort of stuck in between?
Yeah, it's a really difficult situation. So again, these national borders have been very porous, and they're also very recent. So many of the ethnic groups that live in these border areas are spread across the national borders anyways, and have moved across those borders for centuries for work. For example, a lot of the Karen groups on the eastern border with Thailand, Those communities and families are spread across Myanmar and Thailand and have been that way for a very long time, or move for seasonal labor across the national border. So many communities have fled east into Thailand, where there's some degree of cultural assimilation, but the Thai government has begun to crack down on Burmese people coming from Myanmar. So that's quite difficult. For the Rohingya and other Muslims who are going into Bangladesh and India, Cox's Bazar which is the name of the refugee camp in Bangladesh. It is the world's largest refugee settlement. So hundreds and hundreds of thousands of Rohingya Muslims have fled there. And Bangladesh does not have the resources to take care of them, to manage that community. With recently, India passed a Citizenship Amendment Act, which is a strange situation, but it's supposedly going to make it easier for mostly non-Muslim communities seeking refugee status in India to find refugee status. So it's very unclear whether that will actually help the matter or just make everything worse as refugees that are in Bangladesh try to move further west. But there's also, prior even to that, the sort of statelessness of communities and the groups of people called boat people, who in this memoir, this is how Habibur Rahman, he ends up in Malaysia and then in Australia and is on one of these boats sort of picked up by the Australian military floating in the Andaman Sea, or not, I think he made it further than that. But yeah, so no, there are no sort of clear ways for these communities to find resources to settle permanently.
Thanks. I actually had a question that you had mentioned the kind of social kind of protesting occurring. I was curious how much maybe students were involved in that, and if you could talk a little more about that.
Yes, okay. Students are the driving force behind the protest movements, absolutely. Here, we can go back to that slide too. Yeah, so many young people organizing these protests and showing up for them. Students have long been the leaders of the independence movement. All the sort of resistance movements are often led by students. And universities have often been the first places to come under attack from military government. So for example, in the anti-colonial resistance, the closure of the universities was like the first thing. As soon as people started organizing at the universities, they were closed by the colonial administration. And education has been so hard fought. It's really difficult for people to access education in general in Myanmar. There's also been a huge civil disobedience movement in response to the 2021 coup. So most of the schools that are government run are staffed with teachers who are government employees. After the coup, they didn't go to work. So it was a sort of self-closure of schools, of refusing to show up on behalf of the government. Same with hospitals, nurses and physicians refusing to go to the hospital and instead treating patients anywhere else. So the CDM movement is still going strong basically through mutual aid. Nobody's getting a salary from the government anymore, but their communities are supporting them. And so that's all student-led and, yeah, civil worker-led, yes.
Thank you so much. We're almost out of time, so unless anyone has any other questions, can we please thank Dr. Long for coming today?
Thank you.
That's all, folks. I hope I see you again at 2 o'clock for our next talk.
great. I'm glad. I'm glad.
Thank you for coming, Dr. Long. My
Yeah.
name is Brent. I take photos for the university.
Cool.
I'll send these pictures I took today to Dr. Jones. I'll let you all coordinate and let her share them with you.
Okay, thank
But
you.
if you'd like to take a picture with her or any other faculty members, this backdrop is a great spot.